In the beginning. Birth of the cosmos and underworld. In the beginning, when existence itself was only a whisper of possibility, there stretched the infinite void of chaos, not just emptiness, but a writhing formless potential, a darkness so complete that even the concept of darkness had not yet been born. Here, in this primordial chasm, the first stirrings of creation began their ancient dance from chaos, and the fundamental forces that would shape all existence first appeared. Gaia, the Earth Mother, came from the void, coalescing from the void like a dream taking shape in the mind of a sleeping god as she breathed for the first time. The very act created space itself, pushing back the boundaries of nothingness. Next, Tartarus, the deepest pit, appeared, a gulf so deep that even Gaia's endless depths could not contain it, unlike Gaia's warm embrace. The proto-underworld Tartarus was the cold, dark, gloomy realm where light itself went to die. It was so deep that it would take 9 days and 9 nights to descend into it, and even then, one would not reach the bottom between them. Bridging the gulf between foundation and void came Ao's not merely love as mortals would come to know it, but the fundamental force of attraction, the power that draws like to like, that compels the scattered dust of creation to coalesce and to form arrows, stirred the emptiness mixing chaos with purpose, desire with possibility. Thus began the great work of creation with Tartarus already established, as the world beneath all worlds waiting patiently in its eternal darkness for the denizens that would one day populate. Its depths, as the cosmic dance continued, the primal forces began to take definite shape. Mother Earth, in her infinite creativity, gave birth to Uranus, the star-studded sky, who stretched himself above her like a protective blanket. Their union would spawn the mighty Titans, those first divine children who would rule before the age of Olympus. Yet even as creation flourished above, the great void below deepened further. Unlike the evolving upper dominions, it remained changeless, eternal, a dark mirror to the growing brightness of the world. Here in this lightless prison, the seeds of future punishment were sown for what else was needed for justice, but a place where the guilty could be held forever. Erebus and Nyx night, and darkness themselves emerged from the primordial murk. They would bear their own children out of the bright upper air, and Hera the day, in the endless cycle of light and shadow that would define the mortal experience. Yet Nyx maintained her ancient connection to Tartarus, her shadowy dominion, intertwining with the depths. In ways that would remain mysterious even to the gods themselves, time flowed differently than measured not in days, but in the rising and falling of divine ages. Cronus, who had deposed his father Uranus in a cosmic act of violence, ruled the Titans, but fate, the weaver of unavoidable tales, had already woven the thread that would unravel Cronus' empire. Zeus, the youngest son saved from his father's devouring hunger, grew mighty on Crete. When his time came, he gathered allies among the Titans and waged war that shook the foundations of reality itself. For 10 years the cosmos trembled as old guard clashed with new thunder against earthquake, tradition against destiny. The battle's conclusion came not through mere strength, but through cunning strategy. The youngest son descended into Tartarus, that ancient prison, and freed the Cyclops and 100-handers whom Cronus had. Imprisoned there, these grateful beings forged for their liberator the weapons of victory, the thunderbolt that would become his eternal symbol of power. When the Titans finally fell, it was Tartarus itself that claimed them. The primordial deep, which had waited patiently through all the ages of creation, finally received its purpose. The defeated Titans were cast down into its hollows, where they would remain imprisoned, their rage becoming the foundation of all future suffering. In the aftermath of victory, the cosmos needed new rulers. The 3 brother kings met to divide creation among themselves. Legend speaks of lots drawn from a bronze helm, chance deciding their respective dominions. Yet destiny has a way of making what must be appear accidental. The Skyfather asserted that the sky and heavens had seized his throne. Some claim that he drew the short lot, receiving the least desirable inheritance. Mount Olympus, where he could survey all creation, gave the Sea Lord the vast waters, those regions where mystery dwelt beneath the waves, and the eldest brother lost the kingdom of the dead and the dominion of the underworld. Others claim that the eldest always had the right to control death, and that the lot was only a formality. Regardless of the reality, the new king received his share with the slumber that befitted someone who would control all mortal endings. The descent was both physical and metaphysical, as the Dark Lord made his way through layers of rock and earth, through caverns that appeared to swallow light itself. He was changing the god who had known the bright halls of Olympus into something else, not darker but deeper, and more attuned to the weight of finality that would define his dominion. Finally, he arrived at the center of his new kingdom, where darkness and pressure met in perfect marriage. The Death Ruler set up his throne, where black obsidian and adamantine materials that had never seen light formed his seat of power, in contrast to the golden thrones of Olympus. This was substance made manifest, eternally unyielding and grave around his throne room, and the space itself seemed to change and adapt. Caverns expanded to accommodate the need for courts of judgment. Like arteries, the tunnels branched, forming routes for the rivers that will eventually flow. The Lord of Death was fully aware of his role as the architecture of death was taking shape, with each element forming with an inevitable purpose. While his brothers ruled over domains of life and motion, his would be the land of silence and memory. No resentment clouded his acceptance, because did not everything, including gods, eventually find their way to his dominion in his own time and in his own way? He was the most powerful of all because no one could ultimately escape his sovereignty, thus establishing the eternal order, sky, sea, and underworld, each ruled by its appointed lord, and thus began the lengthy tale of the depths below, where all stories eventually come to an end, and where new ones are forever beginning their dark gestation. Organizing the death domain. When the gods sought to bind themselves with unbreakable oaths, they called upon the Styx, whose black current held the weight of permanence itself. To break such an oath meant forfeiting divine power for 9 cycles of the sun, a punishment so severe that even Zeus honored its authority. Next came Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, whose pale waters whispered of oblivion, carrying away memories as surely as time. His dominion required rivers to flow, guardians to stand watch, and boundaries to be drawn between the living and those who had crossed beyond. From the depths of this newly claimed dominion, waters began to emerge, not ordinary waters, but essential currents that would define the nature of death itself. When they woke up, some people would purposefully taste its waters in an attempt to escape painful memories, while others would unintentionally fall into its current and lose themselves to its gentle erasure. Then came Erin, the river of pain and woe, whose waters were thick with the echoes of mortal suffering. Eroding stone souls who drank from lay found their earthly concerns dissolving, their past lives becoming as distant as dreams. Unlike Lethe's graceful withdrawal, dark currents carried the weight of human anguish, forming a barrier between the place of permanent rest below and the live world above. Erin's passage was about acknowledging that before moving forward, every soul must face their mortality and feel the weight of their demise. In defiance of natural law, the fourth appeared Phlegson, the river of fire that burned without devouring, eternal flames that danced across liquid surfaces, producing a torrent of heat that purified rather than destroyed. The last to form was Cocytus, the river of lamentation, where the essence of grief itself flowed as water carrying the wails of those who mourned. Its icy current preserved the tears of the departed, creating a permanent record of sorrow that would forever echo through the halls of death. Cocytus marked the final boundary of Tartarus, where the most terrible punishments awaited those who had disobeyed divine law. With the rivers established, the sovereign of the dead began populating his dominion with guardians and attendants, each selected for their special ability to keep the peace in this world of eternal transition. Those destined for punishment would eventually experience its burning touch, while others might glimpse its light from safe distances, reminding others that some aspects of the divine remain beyond mortal understanding. The oldest Pharaoh, Karen, initially responded to the call with a shabby appearance but an eternal purpose. He set up his station at the shores of the Styx, where his weathered hands learned to steer his boat through perilous waters, and his hollow eyes became capable of identifying souls deserving of passage. The deceased saw him as their first guide into the new life beyond mortality at the gates themselves, while the living dreaded his gloomy face. The three-headed hound Siberus defied the laws of nature simply by existing. 3 figures emerged to serve as judges of the dead minus Rhadamanthus and Archus. Each had ruled kingdoms in the world above with wisdom and justice, and now their earthly experience qualified them to evaluate the lives of those who stood before them. One head served to guard against the living who might seek unauthorized entry, another to prevent the dead from attempting escape, and the third to welcome those whose time had truly come. His bark echoed through caverns with the resonance of finality itself, and even brave heroes would learn to respect the barriers he upheld. Minos was able to simplify the most difficult moral dilemmas with his lawgiver's intellect. Rhadamanthus established a rigorous devotion to principles that clearly distinguished between good and wrong. He was tough yet compassionate, understanding the gravity of the situation while upholding the rules of divine justice. Death and sleep replaced Thanos and Hypnos as necessary forces instead of only being present. The twin brother brought gentler darkness and the little deaths of nightly rest that prepared mortals for their final transition together, bridging the gap between consciousness and oblivion and establishing the rhythm of mortal existence. Thanos moved through the upper world as inevitable incarnate, marking the end of every mortal thread at its appointed time. The Arians, subsequently renamed the Furies, acknowledged their position as pursuing wrongdoers. These ancient spirits, who were created from Urano's blood when Cronus first defeated him, now served a new ruler named Alto, the unrelenting Magira, the bearer of grudges, and Tisiphone, the murderous avenger. Unlike other denizens of the netherworld who awaited the arrival of souls, their names became whispered warnings among mortals. As these divine appointments continued, the errants roamed freely between realms, seeking individuals whose sins required rapid care. As a result, the underworld's physical layout started to reflect its intended use. Without human intervention, stone walls rose to create courts where judgment would be rendered. Waiting areas grew to accommodate the never-ending flow of arriving souls, while passageways carved themselves out of the rock to create routes that various types of the deceased would use to reach their final resting places. The throne room itself changed from its original design. Columns of pure darkness held up a ceiling that was obscured by shadows, and the floor was covered with stones of remembrance, each of which reflected a glimpse of a mortal life that had passed through this chamber. The walls between life and death, which had previously been permeable, now required specific passages and permissions. Gates of horn and ivory emerged, through which false visions and true dreams would occasionally drift upward to the sleeping world. Above these boundaries made sure that the two planes remained properly separated, preventing chaos while allowing for the connections that bound the cosmos together. Piece by piece, the underworld was transformed from an empty void into a fully realized kingdom. Every component had several uses. The guardians serve as guards and guides, and the rivers serve as boundaries and routes. The structure as a machine and a symbol, the realm of death was evolving into a reflection of the well-organized world above, but it was specially tailored to its eternal purpose. Every mortal born into the world above would eventually find their path leading downward, following these established routes to whatever afterlife their deeds had earned them. The structure was complete, and now awaited its first true inhabitants as humanity multiplied upon the earth. This meticulous construction by the ruler of the dead ensured that his dominion would serve not only as a destination, but as a fundamental part of the cosmic order. The rules of death and first souls. These souls, uncertain and perplexed, found themselves reaching the limits of the living world with no routes for their journey and no rituals to guide them. Mortality followed in their footsteps as illness, age, and tragedy claimed their first victims. The first souls drifted between worlds like mist, some lingering near their bodies unable to understand their state, others wandering aimlessly knowing they could not return to the lands of the living, but unsure where to go next. The cosmic order demanded resolution, and Hermes, the messenger of the gods, approached his uncle with a proposal. His swift sandals, which carried him between Olympus and Earth, could just as easily guide the deceased on their final path. Thus began the tradition of Hermes Psychopoulos, the conductor of souls, establishing the first official connection between mortal death and divine destination. As more mortals passed through the threshold, patterns appeared in the successful passages, and survivors who watched their loved ones go started to realize that some practices made the journey easier while others made it more difficult. The early journeys were uncertain, and some souls resisted their transition while others hurried too eagerly toward whatever lay beyond. Hermes learned to read each spirit, offering comfort to some and firmness to others. Basic conventions of death were developed via trial and error under the guidance of divine whispers and sporadic direct intervention. Karen, whose boat required payment for passage, initially accepted whatever offerings family could provide, but the standardization of a single modest coin ensured that the poorest could afford passage while preventing the wealthy from corrupting the process with extravagant bribes. The obol, a single coin placed upon the deceased's tongue or eyelids, became the first established ritual. The act of burial itself developed out of necessity rather than emotion. The first souls realized that without appropriate interment, they were trapped between lives, unable to finish their journey, but unable to come back to life. The earth had to receive the body in order for the spirit to fully enter its new realm. Each custom that arose served both practical and emotional purposes, binding the community of the living while facilitating the journey of the dead out of necessity and divine design. Mourning rituals evolved naturally as the living sought to ease their grief while honoring their dead. Liquidations poured upon the ground created liquid connections between worlds, and funeral games celebrated the departed life while simultaneously acknowledging its end. The soul's journey was divided into discrete phases, each with a unique goal and difficulty. Death can arrive in a variety of ways throughout the world, from a gentle hand on the shoulder to a sudden shock of violence. For some people, the separation of body and spirit happens gradually, while for others it happens all at once. Regardless of how it occurs, death signifies a transition rather than an end. The soul finds itself in a liminal state after being separated from mortal flesh. It is still connected to the physical world through memory and emotion, but it is drawn inexorably toward its ultimate destination. Hermes appears here, providing comfort and certainty. He does not force the journey, but instead guides with patience, allowing each soul time to say goodbye to the world above. The path to the Styx varies for each soul, reflecting their earthly life. Some travel quickly through familiar landscapes before these familiar places fade into the misty boundaries between realities. Others must traverse symbolic terrain, crossing metaphorical mountains of regret or lakes of sorrow. Each journey serves as the soul's initial processing of its own mortality at the river's edge. For the first time, Karen sees the judgmentless, soulless eyes of the ancient ferryman. Just acknowledging the existence of another spirit that needs to be past the importance of mortal right is emphasized by the fact that a correctly placed obol by loved ones guarantees a seamless crossing. Without it, the soul must wait a century on the shores as a penalty for improper burial. The crossing itself turns into a transitional meditation. More than just geographical distances, the seas of Styx delineate the line separating earthly worries from eternal viewpoints. As they approach the gates of their new existence, many souls report feeling the weight of their earthly existence dissipating throughout this passage and their priorities changing. Cerberus welcomes everyone with his three-headed scrutiny. He makes sure that no living thing enters the afterlife, and that the dead have their proper opportunity to appear before the three judges, while the souls of the righteous pass easily, while those harboring guilt feel the weight of his judgment even before they reach the actual courts. Every soul must confront the ultimate truth. As Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Acus sit in their designated locations, their divine eye penetrates past self-deception and justifications to the very center of every life. The procedure changes based on how complicated the soul is. Simple lifestyles characterized by blatant goodness or blatant immorality are promptly judged. More complex lives need to be carefully considered, with each decision being evaluated in light of the situation and the judge's intentions. In challenging circumstances, they confer with one another. Stories about particularly noteworthy rulings start to circulate among the living, demonstrating their collective wisdom and ensuring that justice triumphs over a merely technical interpretation of divine law. The merchant who hoarded grain during a famine was sentenced to eternal hunger in the depths of Tartarus, and the soldier who died valiantly in battle was granted immediate passage to Elysium. These stories serve as both a warning and an inspiration, influencing mortal behavior through the assurance of cosmic justice. But once the final destination is announced, it cannot be changed. The three judges' ruling is definitive and reflects not just mortal law, but also the greater harmony of cosmic order. The typical journey ends with the soul being guided to its final home. Asphodel meadows await the majority, while special regions beckon those marked by exceptional virtue or terrible vice. Each soul receives exactly what their life has earned, not through arbitrary punishment or reward, but through the natural consequences of their choices made manifest in eternity. These initial passes established protocols that would last for millennia, the orderly passage of innumerable souls through the meticulously crafted pathways of the dead, with judgment established and the realms within take shape. The channels that outlined the afterlife's geography started to react to divine will, much like clay forming under a potter's hands. The underworld landscape changed and developed, forming unique settings where various souls would spend eternity. Each territory had its own personality, light and absence, and for these common people who lived lives that were neither extraordinary in virtue nor exceptional in wickedness, the Asphodel Meadows slowly took shape like morning mist, stretching into gray expanses beyond mortal comprehension, where colorless flowers bloomed without fragrance and swayed in breezes that provided neither warmth nor chill. These endless plains offered neutrality incarnate, not suffering, but an eternal absence of the vivid sensations that defined mortal existence. The sky above remained continuously dawn-like, neither too dark to oppress nor too light to inspire. Souls flowed past one another like ghosts of memory, their shapes merely echoes of their living selves, occasionally recognizing familiar faces, but unable to recreate the passionate bonds of their past lives. The landscape itself appeared to exist in perpetual neutrality, with no seasons to indicate the passage of eternity, no growth or decay to punctuate life, and time without meaning. Trees produced fruit that offered nutrition without enjoyment, as streams of lukewarm water meandered through fields that didn't need to be tended. In sharp contrast to the gray monotony of the Asphodel Plains, a region of golden light began to coalesce at the farthest edge of the underworld kingdom, Elysium, which appeared as the eternal reward for those who had proven themselves exceptional, whether through heroic deeds, divine favor, or lives lived with uncommon virtue. This domain's very architecture ensured that souls experienced neither want nor fulfillment, a perfect balance that many living would consider the ultimate punishment, even though it brought no active suffering. While winds delivered the aroma of ambrosia and perpetual flowers, the environment remained perfectly pleasant without being oppressive or chilly. Meadows where the grass surrendered underfoot without being crushed, streams of nectar meandered through trees bearing fruit that was always ripe yet never fell to ruin. A region created for comfort without monotony, as opposed to other souls, restless wandering poets wrote verses that encapsulated divine truth, and the fortunate residents of Elysium found meaning in eternal endeavors. Warriors who had fought valiantly participated in simulated conflicts in which no one actually died. Athletes participated in competitions where winning conferred dignity without devaluing the loser. Now that they were not constrained by death, each soul was free to seek whatever fulfilled them in life. Unlike other spirits that lost their mortal connections through Lethe's waters, the blessed fields even provided links between their occupants and the world above. The inhabitants of Elysium remained cognizant of their descendants, and occasionally had the ability to affect events in the living world. They transformed into ancestor spirits who spoke protection and wisdom to their mortal ancestry. Whereas other regions offered only acceptance of fate, Elysium offered possibility, while pleasant territories formed above the ancient pit continued to evolve into the fundamental zone of punishment. Some souls found such contentment here that they voluntarily remained for eternity, while others chose to drink from Lethe's waters in return for additional lives in an attempt to prove their virtue. Tartarus went beyond ordinary incarceration and evolved into a domain intended for extremely specialized tortures that were exactly fitted to the offenses committed by each offender. The landscape changed as a result of need. This area turned into a workshop where divine justice created ideal punishments, each one precisely matched to the type of crime committed. Cliffs of obsidian rose to make room for those who had to push boulders for all eternity. Lakes of fire formed for those who betrayed sacred hospitality. In wheels of burning, bronze appeared for those who dared to have divine aspiration. When thirst pushed him to drink water, he found himself standing in a lake beneath fruit trees, and when hunger compelled him to reach for fruit branches that were raised out of his reach, Tantalus found his permanent annoyance. This was the first time a former monarch had given his own son as a feast for the gods. This penalty for wanting something that was always out of reach became the model for divine vengeance. Sisyphus, the master of cunning, discovered that even wisdom had its limitations after he twice avoided death by using cunning. His rock, which was about the right size for one man to move, was impossible to push past the crest of the hilltop. Every time he tried, the stone rolled back, forcing him to start over. The punishment effectively conveyed the futility of attempting to outsmart the universe's own order. He spun eternally, knowing no rest except the fleeting moments when flames died to embers before reigniting, and Ixion's wheel of fire punished hubris in motion, rather than stillness confined to its burning spokes for trying to woo the divine queen. His punishment became a model for those who mistakenly believed that being mortal meant having divine privilege. The punishment for the 50 sisters who killed their husbands on their wedding night suggested that some crimes created their own endless cycles, requiring the soul to repeat its failure until it understood the immutable nature of justice. Each punishment served multiple purposes, including torment for the guilty, warning for potential transgressors, and demonstration that divine justice operated beyond mortal comprehension. The Danids faced eternal frustration, forced to fill a massive jar using vessels with holes, and experienced the futility of seeking redemption for premeditated violence. As the ultimate judicial chamber of the cosmos, Tartarus attained its full complexity when many levels arose inside its depths. The bigger the offense, the deeper the punishment. The region grew as needed, creating new torments for distinct crimes while retaining its fundamental essence. The architecture of agony became a reflection of the moral hierarchy, ensuring that souls faced consequences proportionate to their misdeeds as these distinct provinces established themselves. No simple walls could separate such different zones of existence. Instead, the fabric of the afterlife itself shifted in quality from one region to another, with rivers continuing to serve as transition zones. Betrayers of family sank lowest of all, where even the dim light that penetrated upper levels could not reach the architecture of agony. The darkest souls facing Tartarus found that the rivers themselves reflected their punishment. Burning waters of Phlegethon offered no passage, but only a preview of the eternal fire that awaited Cocytus. The more deeply they tried to cross its icy grip, the more features emerged that served as landmarks and barriers. Souls bound for the Asphodel Meadows found themselves carried by gentle currents that gradually muted their memories of mortal life. Those headed for Elysium experienced waters that refreshed rather than diminished, preparing them for the enhanced existence that awaited. Before their ultimate assignment, souls could reflect on their life on the plane of judgment, which served as a neutral ground. In order to ensure that the justice of each assignment was upheld, hills of remembrance provided elevated views of various regions, enabling souls to fully comprehend what they were leaving behind or approaching passageways that prevented inappropriate crossings. Without divine permission, souls from one zone could not traverse into another. Underworld changed from a single domain into a complex tapestry of interconnected territories, as a result of these passages shifting and changing in response to need, creating a dynamic geography that reflected the living nature of cosmic justice. Each zone served its purpose within the larger whole, guaranteeing that every soul found exactly what their life had earned them. The afterlife's infrastructure was complete and prepared to accommodate the never-ending stream of mortal deaths that would ensue. The cosmic order had assumed definitive form, but the domain of seasonal cycles and divine marriage. While his brothers ruled with divine consorts at their sides, death remained oddly alone. The Master of Shadows ruled over his domain alone, and the weight of this solitude would soon change not only his dominion, but also the rhythm of mortal existence on the earth above in the world of light. She moved through the living world as life's promise incarnate maiden rather than mother spring, rather than autumn possibility, rather than memory from the depths below. Eyes watched her dance through sunlit fields. Data's daughter Persephone, whose name meant bringer of destruction, picked flowers among the narcissus and crocus, her youthful laughter echoing across meadows that knew no winter. With Zeus's silent approval but Demeter's unknowing, the plan was created. The loneliness of the underworld had become overwhelming its monarch, and in Persephone's elegant movements, he saw a kindred spirit that glided between light and darkness and whose name spoke of transformation. As the maiden reached for a particularly lovely bloom, the earth split up like a ravenous mouth, and a chariot of ebony pulled by horses whose breath came as mist, and whose hoof-blasted sparks from the air itself appeared before her shocked cry could fully develop. Carried by arms that radiated the chill of eternity, Persephone was pulled into a blackness deeper than any she had ever experienced. The descent happened in heartbeats but seemed to go on forever. Persephone saw denizens that moved like shadows among shadows and tunnels that sucked up light rivers that ran against the laws of nature. Her kidnapper said nothing, his countenance gloomy with the realization that this deed had triggered not only a human yearning, but also a cosmic necessity that demanded its rightful place. The harvest goddess recognized her daughter's absence before she could hear any mortal cries. Dida's divine nature resonated with the wound torn in the fabric of mother-child connection. Her search began immediately, taking her from mountain peak to ocean depth, questioning every creature and spirit along her desperate path. As her search continued fruitless, something fundamental shifted in the Earth's fertility fields. That had been green began to pale, their life essence draining like breath from a dying creature. Animals ceased to mate and give birth, rivers slowed to sullen. Trickles the very soil seemed to steal itself against producing nourishment, matching its goddess's growing desolation. Dida's wandering took her to realms both mortal and divine. She questioned Helios, the sun god who sees all beneath the sky. She sought wisdom from Hecate, the witch goddess, who knew the paths between worlds. Each answer brought her closer to truth, though none provided the reunion she desperately sought. Meanwhile, humanity watched in growing horror as their harvests withered and their livestock weakened. 9 days and nights she searched without rest taking. Neither ambrosia nor nectar, her divine radiance dimming with each fruitless hour. When at last the truth emerged that her brother had sanctioned her daughter's seizure, Dida's rage transformed the world. No longer would the earth bear fruit, let gods and mortals alike experience the barrenness that matched her heart. The famine spread like a disease across the living world. Cities that had flourished began to starve. Temples stood empty as farmers abandoned fields that would not yield. The cosmic balance teetered on the edge. Catastrophe, for without mortal worship and sacrifice, even the Olympians would feel the pinch of diminished power. Eventually Zeus recognized that catastrophe approached. The king of gods could not allow mortality to perish entirely, for then who would honor the divine? Hermes received his commission as messenger, tasked with retrieving the maiden from the depths. Yet the laws of the cosmos operated according to principles. Even Zeus could not ignore the messenger. Descended through the now familiar paths to his uncle's court. There he found not the grief-stricken captive he expected, but a young goddess beginning to understand the power of her new domain. According to some stories, Epiphany had consumed 3 more pomegranate seeds, a fruit whose red flesh resembled the color of life itself. This small deed tied her to the kingdom below because, according to ancient law, one cannot eat the food of the dead and return unaltered to the living. But the world above could not continue without Dida's approval. There had to be a compromise, a balance between absolute extremes. The wisdom of need was included in the agreement reached. Persephone would spend equal time in both worlds, part of each year, ascending to rejoin her mother, and the world of light part, returning to rule beside her shadowy husband in the depths below. The exact division varied by account. Some spoke of equal halves, others of a third in darkness, and 2/3 in light. This cosmic contract created the rhythm that would define mortal experience. When Persephone rose from the underworld each spring, Dida's joy manifested in the earth's renewal. Flowers bloomed, creatures mated, and fields became fertile once more. When the daughter queen descended again, her mother's sorrow turned the world toward autumn and winter. As life retreated deep beneath the earth's surface, the union between dark sovereign and spring maiden created more than seasonal change. Within the shadowy halls of death, a different kind of power blossomed. Persephone, no longer the innocent wanderer of flowered fields, developed into a figure of dual nature. She retained the warmth of spring, but gained the authority of endings. The bleakness of the asphodel meadows gained subtle variations of gray. As queen of the dead, she brought about changes to the afterlife itself. She also created new gardens, where blessed souls could tend to plants that bloomed with memories and fragrance. Even punishment in Tartarus gained the context of seasons, when Persephone's influence made the eternal torments pause, if only momentarily. The marriage also established new protocols for the living's interaction with the dead, making Persephone more approachable than her harsh husband and acting as an intercessor of sorts. When she walked the threshold between worlds in this sacred union, ancient powers combined in new ways, and Earth's fertility now carried the weight of inevitable endings. Mothers who lost children could pray to her for comfort because she understood the pain of separation, and those who wanted to contact departed loved ones found her more likely to grant brief meetings during those hours. The cosmic dance had found its eternal rhythm, with Persephone moving as the living thread connecting above and below. Her throne, carved from crystalline stone that held light within its depths, stood beside the obsidian seat of her shadowy spouse. Together, they ruled the sanctum of endings. She understood the vitality of life, and he understood its inevitable conclusion. Each blade of grass carried the seed of its own decay, and every death carried the promise of renewal. the underworld gained not only a queen, but also a bridge between kingdoms that had previously stood in stark separation because of their court, which became the fullest expression of the duality that governed existence itself. Through her, the living and the dead maintained a constant connection, and the world above found meaning in the pattern of its own seasons. The cosmic order had attained a wholeness that it had previously lacked, with even death itself taking part in the never-ending cycle of renewal. The journeys of mortals and heroes. Defined, but the distinctions between the living and the dead weren't just. Noted that several estimates were questioned over the ages. Would have the audacity to cross the barrier and create legends that reverberated. These warriors, motivated by duty, love, or divine mandate, would traverse both realms. Learned that although the costs were still high among mortals, the realm of death had pathways for the living. The son of Zeus was stronger than all the champions when King Arithius ordered the completion of his 12th and last task to bring Cerberus into the world. Even the seasoned warriors assembled at the royal court gasped in shock from above. Disbelief that no one had ever come back after trying to hold Death's guardian in check. The hero prepared differently for this descent, let alone defeat him. Markedly from earlier tasks, he wrapped guns and armor instead. His heavenly birthright in the lion's hide, which provided him with protection from both natural and supernatural forces, appeared this time in tactful diplomacy rather than fury as he approached them. Athena and Hermes followed him on the first descent through the gloomy limits. Their heavenly presences, which enabled him to successfully navigate the first guardians and helped him to understand the distinction between consenting residents and inmates, as well as between. The hero swiftly discovered that in this field, knowledge helped those confined by circumstance. Better than force when he finally faced Heracles, the three-headed monster. Offered the respect deserved for carrying out a necessary task, he asked for authorization for the trial instead of. The Death Lord himself was drawn to this strategy of demanding passage by violence and established a condition. Cerberus must be defeated by the hero without the use of weapons or heavenly relics. Only his own will and strength, and the ensuing wrestling match rocked the. Three pairs of teeth snarled toward the hero's head at the base of the darkest caverns. Heracles clutched the thick throat as the serpent tail struck like lightning. Next, concentrating his renowned power while dodging the poisonous stings that. For what felt like eternity, the struggle went on until finally the powerful Hound saw that the mortal had strength stronger than his own triumph. Son of gods, yet as wisdom arrived, Heracles realized that this victory. Cerberus could not stay at his post permanently, upholding the cosmic order that the heroes quest to. Mortals were momentarily disturbed by the surface and fled in fear of death's protector under the open sky, but Heracles kept his word by putting the beast back in its proper place. Music had powers, but strength could compel entry to the lower realm. Orpheus, whose lyre could charm stones, is a more subdued, yet no less captivating figure. And domesticated wild animals learned that even immortals' steely hearts could give way to flawless music when grief served as the catalyst for the demise of. During the actual marriage celebration, Eurydice quickly became a snake bite victim. Before his vows could be fully fulfilled, the well-known musician saw his beloved fade. Spoken and in his sorrow, he came up with a scheme that nobody could believe except. He received his divine heritage from Calliope, the chief of muses. His descent followed a different path because he was confident that his talent could do what force could never do. Routes that warriors traveled, Orpheus didn't require a guide because his music developed on its own. No coin was needed for the boat across Styx to be illuminated in the dark, Karen. Discovered that he was rowing in time to songs about the transient beauty of life. Songs of grief and loneliness made Cerberus docile, allowing passage. Without opposition, Orpheus performed his masterpiece before the throne of shadows. Lyre sang of commitment that was unable to transcend death and love. Recognize that death is inevitable. The notes contained recollections of happy times spent together and For the first time, the harsh timing of fate denies the promise of future happiness. As the Lord of Death discovered himself in eternity, tears welled up in the eyes of God. Fresh from the world above, Epiphany, moved by mortal emotion, contributed her voice too. She acknowledged the same affection that had linked Orpheus in his devotion. The same drive that caused her yearly separation from Data to be so agonizing. Because of the musician's exceptional talent and the gentle prodding of his queen, the King of Shadows was unprecedented resurrection of Eurydice, but cautionary heavenly compassion. One need for the gift is that Orpheus must lead the way without turning around. Until both were standing in the full warmth of the sun, faith in the heavenly promise had too. The musician was joyfully received with full trust and without doubting. As they ascended through narrow corridors toward the surface in the last moments, he heard his loving footsteps behind him. Demonstrated the harshness of fate as soon as the first rays of sunshine reached his doubtful face. Infiltrated Orpheus's heart, the quiet behind him appearing too total in the final moment before fully waking up. He turned to make sure Eurydice, followed and horrified as she vanished back into the shadows, his cries of a voice of pure despair reverberated between realms, altering them. The laws of the underworld's acoustics would not be given another chance. Once twisted, death was unable to completely break. Orpheus returned to the world by himself. Above all, his music was permanently altered by his realization of his gains and losses. His later travels and final demise at the hands of those unable to tolerate beauty, tainted with such grief. All originated from the single glance back at the time when skepticism triumphed over divine. Whereas arrogance attracted the wrath of the gods, trust brought them to mercy, two heroes. Overwhelming pride and camaraderie came up with a scheme so bold that Pyrrhus and Theseus, king of Athens, opposed the fundamental order itself. Not merely any heavenly maidens, but the ruler of Thessaly. Their scheme was conceived by the very queen of the underworld herself, who appeared too. A logical progression after facing demons and defeating adversaries, they thought. Originally suggested that they were deserving of celestial brides. This first crime is the kidnapping of Helen of Sparta, daughter of Zeus, by a mortal mother. Achieved by coercion and deceit, but they agreed that Helen would visit Theseus as payment for his assistance. The heroes bravely started their descent into Persephone with the larger treasure. Felt that stories about their actions had impressed them and that their reputations preceded them. They expected champions to be honored, even the Lord of Shadows. Their bravado prevented them from negotiating politely for the queen's hand. The reception they received made their goal, that no mortal could own one who reigned by divine right, impossible. Bearing the burden of cosmic derision, the Death Lord provided them with appropriate chairs. The chair of forgetfulness's magical qualities bound the aristocratic guests. Immediately, as memory seeped from their heads like water through broken stones, their flesh grew into the living stone. Vessels, they were included into the furniture itself, serving as constant alerts against divine transgression, while the King of Shadows sat imprisoned in their developing amnesia. Planned his own lesson, while staff served the paralyzed with meals. Persephone would walk past the heroes' feasts they could see but not touch. Sometimes her stately bearing serves as a continual reminder of their foolishness, which caused them to lose their sense of purpose. Their fabled strength was rendered as useless as mortal, and they became permanent fixtures. Swords and Heracles in this domain, when he was descending for the 12th labor himself. Theseus the hero arrived upon his cousin and was caught between. Friendship and reverence for divine order through the use of divinely enhanced strength. Eventually, he succeeded in freeing Theseus, albeit at a price, the king of. Parts of the flesh that Athens left behind exhibit permanent scars from his. His ambition earned him a permanent place in the house, and his foolishness kept him there forever. The universe he believed he could conquer, the chair, became a part of the underworld. Architecture as a warning story, manifested in tangible form that future souls will encounter. And marvel at the statue, which is a monument to mortal hubris meeting. When heroes failed due to pride or might, a mortal succeeded in the name of divine justice. Via a spirit of humility and love, whose beauty attracted Venus's attention. She was entangled in a celestial conspiracy that would provide her immortality through appropriate. The goddess of love, who is envious of mortal beauty that rivals her own, praise. Ordered Cupid, her son, to make Psyche fall in love with the most repulsive creature. Unthinkable, but the young deity unintentionally noticed the maiden's genuine beauty. He hurt himself with his own arrow, starting a secret heavenly romance. And mystery with Psyche's love for an invisible husband who only came around at night. When family members exposed their curiosity by violating the sacred taboo, Psyche lost. The palace of dreams, where they had lived in pursuit of happiness and their lover. After making amends with Venus, she was forced to perform impossible chores. The ultimate test that pierced the core of divine pride was intended to validate her inadequacy. Beauty from Persephone herself, equipped with heavenly guidance that was discreetly passed by. Psyche, a compassionate god, descended more cautiously than earlier heroes. She brought barley cakes and special food to appease Cerberus. More significantly, she brought instructions to oppose at Charon's fair. Refuse the drowning temptation and dismiss the pathetic man who is pleading for assistance with his donkey. Hand that pleaded for help turned down the feast that Persephone. Each servant resisted temptation, which tested various facets of her personality. Cold determination served the larger good, but compassion might have meant her demise. Purpose, as seen by her humility when she eventually faced the underworld queen. Seeing in the mortal maiden a strength more disarming than any hero's. The sought gift of beauty, enclosed in a sealed container, was a representation of her own difficulties between realms. Box the return trip required equal caution, and there was one last rule not to. Open the heavenly container herself, but the same quality of feminine curiosity that lost her wonderful husband, which nearly brought her to ruin because she couldn't withstand the promise of. When Psyche, the heavenly beauty, opened the box, she discovered not a cosmetic improvement, but Stygian slumber is a death-like stupor that is reserved for goddesses and not for humans. To discover that Cupid's involvement was the only thing that rescued her after pleading with his father Zeus. Seeking authorization to publicly declare his love, the young couple's ascent to Olympus changed Psyche from mortal to. When the hero's power failed, she achieved god status by immortalizing her tribulations. Her tale served as a model for achieving the same goal, demonstrating the appropriate methodology. Force and pride could never accomplish what a humble acceptance of divine will might. Achieve whilst the majority of heroes pursued the world of death for their own benefit, some. Odysseus was imprisoned in a state of wandering after descending in search of wisdom for the greater good. For his journey to the edge of the world, a vindictive Poseidon needed prophetic advice that only the dead could supply. At the frontiers of the Arab world, where day and night collide, secrets essential to Unlike others, he does not have to enter death's realm completely when returning home. Through sacrifice, he attracted spirits to himself by performing rites at the boundary. Amid ceremony, the hero used his bronze sword to dig a ditch and poured libations of. After sprinkling white grain with honey, wine, and water, he called forth the spirits of the deceased by summoning them and sacrificing an animal, allowing their blood to fill the. Elpenor, his lately deceased buddy, was the first to emerge from the trench. Unsung on Circe's island, this experience taught Odysseus right away how important it is to be buried properly, even after death. He pledged the appropriate funeral privileges, indicating that the realm was governed by norms of honor and respect. Despite the cosmic barrier, his mother continued to fulfill her obligations to the deceased. Following her shade, Anticlare disclosed that she had never heard of her son's homecoming. Arrived in Ithaca, the load of her sorrow for his protracted absence had accelerated her own demise. Hero's conscience through tears, which she was only able to recognize once. Consuming the blood that temporarily gave Agamemnon's phantom forms their substance. When he returned, the spirit informed him that his Quenestra had killed him. Troy instructing Odysseus to be cautious before approaching his own homecoming. Seemed to be instructing on the difference between splendor and life itself, better to act as a. Tiresias the prophet was a slave among the living who ruled over the legions of the dead. Blind in both life and death, yet seeing better than anyone, showed the way home. His prophecy included cautions against the sacred sirens Scylla and Charybdis. Most significantly, Helios Cattle predicted the necessity of additional pilgrimages. Even after Ithaca was recaptured for Poseidon's wrath, Ajax the Lesser, who appeared last, was still harboring resentment for their dispute over Achilles' armor, despite Odysseus's entreaties for peace. In order to sustain their worldly impulses beyond death, spirits prefer rage to tranquility. This served as a reminder to the protagonist that wisdom or forgiveness souls brought their true selves into the domain of shadows. As the infinite number of shades started to approach, the Nicaea came to an end. Attracted by blood, which provided them with a brief sense of coherence and the knowledge that some mysteries have been swiftly returned to because they are still too horrible for mortal comprehension. His ship, his descent, had provided the information that was required while exposing that. Of all mortals, the secrets of death were finest experienced when they were appropriate. There were no descents of more cosmic significance than Aeneas's journey to the Cuman Sibyl leads the underworld through the Lake O's portal. The Trojan hero strived to understand his people's fate rather than pursue personal benefit. The Sibyl's preparations were different from the journey, which would actually map Rome's destiny across the landscape of death. Those of earlier descendants, and she needed Aeneas to acquire the golden bow. This mystical branch is considered precious to Diana and serves as a passport to the underworld worlds. Harvested from the shadowy grove close to Cumae, became the quintessential emblem for mortal power to enter the realm of death without using song or strength, but by holding the appropriate divine symbol, his escorted tour of the afterlife had an educational function by highlighting particular topics. Where the wrongfully accused found justice, where baby souls waited. Comfort was given to those who gave their lives for love, and they saw the process of judgment in. Seeing divine justice in detail as a multifaceted mechanism, as opposed to a straightforward reward. In retribution, the fields of mourning had a profound impact on him as he came across. The rejection of Dado, the queen he had left behind in pursuit of his destiny, to accept him. She learned about the enduring power of betrayed love, some wounds are even divine, by turning away to rejoin her first spouse. He was ultimately unable to fully recover among the hallowed groves of Elysium Aeneas. Discovered his father, Anaces, and their reunion brought him both personal happiness and prophetic. Anaces of Revelation described the soul's cleansing process, and reincarnation highlighting Rome's future heroes who are awaiting birth. Names that would reverberate throughout history were disclosed by Romulus Caesar Augustus. Destiny revealed by means of genealogical vision, philosophy, and underworld knowledge was transformed by CI, who discovered that souls passed through cycles of cleansing and return, accumulating knowledge over several lifetimes till reaching. This idea of reincarnation combined with ultimate rest in eternal brightness. Later intellectual ideas, as well as Roman religious thought, will be influenced by the conventional Greek afterlife. Customs the underworld's exit carried with it. Significance, whilst others had found it difficult to get back through the routes they had taken. Through the portal of false dreams, the gates of ivory, Aeneas appeared. This perplexing decision implied that even prophetic truth contained aspects of deceit or different interpretations of the future. Needed human intervention to properly materialize, and his rise brought him back into contact. The subterranean voyage had changed him from a fugitive for heavenly purposes. The visions gave perspective to the nation's creator and leader. Realizing that his personal setbacks were part of a bigger plan than the fall. Rome's ascent was made possible by Troy's deep understanding of cosmic order. Prepared him for the difficulties that would create an empire, so these valiant descendants introduced the idea that although death's domain was off-limits to the living, it was nonetheless accessible under appropriate conditions. Every travel had an impact on both realms, altering the underworld. Procedures, while giving the world above the story vital information, acted as models for demonstrating that strategy was more important than mortal desire was subordinated to reverence for divine order, and occasionally the path to the fullest insight of existence was brought about by death. These heroic periods showed that the world of death was more. Adding complexity to the underworld as a static destination as mortal understanding grew through these legendary journeys, the shadowed domain itself expanded in scope and character. New divine presences emerged, minor deities took their stations, and the mythology surrounding death developed layers that reflected the Greek theological imagination. These additions reflected the complexity of death itself, as well as the growing sophistication of mortal understanding. Other immortal powers found their roles within the expanding hierarchy of the death realm, taking into account the central figures who had ruled since the cosmic division. Arcadia was an ancient goddess of magic and crossroads who established her power at the intersections of worlds. Unlike resident deities, she was able to move freely between realms, her triple form equally at home on land and beneath earth, and her torches illuminated the darkest passages. Her knowledge included both the secret routes back to life and the hidden paths to death's domain. The crossroads she governed were both literally and figuratively marked the locations where multiple paths converged in the intricate geography of the underworld. In a spiritual sense, they stood for the decisions that ultimately decided a soul's destiny. Hecate became the patroness of necromancers, midwives, and other professionals who dealt with beginnings and endings at these limits. Her rituals added new aspects to communication with the deceased. Monthly offerings at three-way crossroads developed into ornate ceremonies. The day's suppers, which included garlic, fish, honey cakes, and eggs, served as communion meals for the living and the dead. These rites created procedures for ongoing communication that previous generations had not thought possible. Melino appeared as a character who was both dreadful and revered. When the spring goddess ascended to her winter palace, her function emerged from the darker halves of Persephone's dual nature. Occasionally, she gave birth to daughters who acquired particular traits. Unlike spirits confined to the shadowy realm, Melina personified the nightmare element of the underworld, coming to impart madness and terror to those who had evaded due justice during life. Melanino mostly moved in the realm above her appearance, announcing collapses of mortal reason. She looked like a figure half dark, half light from the moon, and her presence caused the kind of awake horror that was previously solely connected to guilty dreams. According to certain customs, she was the child. During one of the Skyfather's metamorphoses into the image of death, Persephone secretly became pregnant with Zeus. Her relationship with proper justice was complicated because she not only targeted the wicked, but also those whose guilt went unacknowledged or unpunished by human law. Her visits could force kings to confess to covert crimes or prompt murderers to come forward in a state of insanity, thus acting as an extension of underworld justice into the realm of death. When souls would reach the shadowed gates, Clotho, Lyces, and Atropos retained their ancient authority while forging closer ties to the realm of death. These fates spun, measured, and cut the threads of mortal life, and even the ruler of death acknowledged their authority because they operated outside of linear time in their cavern at the edge of the world. They witnessed the past, present, and future all at once. When a soul entered the underworld, its destined path had already been woven into the cosmic tapestry. This predestination did not negate the need for judgment, but rather made sure that each soul's final destination matched the pattern they had always intended. Their tools gained mythological significance beyond simple metaphor. The spindle of the cloth pulled material from the limitless potential of unformed souls. Each mortal span's length and characteristics were ascertained using Lacassi's measuring rod. Any thread, regardless of its purported strength or protective enchantments, could be cut by Atropos's scissors, which were made of metals that could not exist in the mortal realm. Nyx herself maintained her ancient connections to the underworld. Domain, this primordial night, mother of both Thanatos and Hypnos, served as a bridge between the earliest chaos and the ordered cosmos. Her dark robe, speckled with stars, could grant passage through barriers that even divine authority sometimes could not breach. Her dwelling at the edge of darkness existed in multiple locations, simultaneously: a cavern entrance near the realm of death, a palace beyond the Garden of Atlas, and stations along the night skies. Progression from these vantage points, she observed both mortal and immortal actions, sometimes offering counsel to the ruler of shadows, when cosmic precedent conflicted with present justice. As the underworld's mythology matured, numerous minor figures emerged, each contributing threads to the complex narrative tapestry of death's domain. Their stories often began in the world above, but found resolution below, creating bridges between realms that enriched the overall mythological framework. When King Admetus passed away, his loyal wife volunteered herself as a substitute, turning the familial tragedy into a test of heavenly limits. This made Alcestis' story a paradigm for voluntary dying in place of another. In contrast to those who rejected their fate, Apollo, who had been hosted by the royal household, had agreed to postpone death in exchange for finding a replacement. The descent was marked by peculiar aspects. Her eventual rescue by Heracles during one of his adventures added layers to the story, and the hero's wrestling match with death himself established a new precedent. Alcestis walked voluntarily to claim her husband's destined place, causing uncertainty among the realm's guardians. This was one choosing death not from defeat or punishment, but from love's triumph. Even Thanos could be defeated if mortal virtue and divine intent were correctly aligned. Ajax the Lesser received eternal punishment for hubris of a different order after the sack of Troy, when he dragged Cassandra from Athena's altar, violating the sacred sanctuary that should have protected the prophet. Despite avoiding immediate death, his crime demanded cosmic justice, which mortal courts could not provide. On his journey home, Athena caused storms that destroyed his ships, but Ajax's pride pushed boundaries further, boasting that he would survive despite the gods, while that mortal strength could defeat any divine plan. Ajax's defiance persisted eternally as he refused to enter the designated afterlife regions, instead haunting the edges between areas as a constant reminder that some souls resist cosmic order even after death. His example demonstrated that personality could persist beyond corporeal dissolution. This final blasphemy caused Poseidon to split the very rock to which he clung his shade in the underworld, bearing unique characteristics, while most spirits accepted their fate post-mortem. The realm's dark king was drawn to the water nymph living near the river Coetus by Menth's metamorphosis, and their relationship predated his union with Persephone. signifying early ties between the death domain and the natural powers of the living world. Persephone reacted with divine jealousy when she saw proof of previous devotion upon her accession as queen. Various accounts differed in the precise technique. Was it Persephone who carried out the metamorphosis, or Da who crushed Minthy into fragrant herbs? The outcome was constant. Her soul seeping into the breezes that traveled between the above and lower worlds, the nymph transformed into a mint plant. The characteristics of the herb had symbolic meaning. Its powerful aroma might cover up the decaying smell connected to the world of death. Its ability to stay alert throughout descents into shadowy depths was aided by its stimulating qualities, and its ability to develop even under unfavorable circumstances demonstrated that nature can thrive even when it is close to the realm of death. Orpheus's final descent into the underworld resonated with his previous journey there, as a broken poet shunned by the world that had seen his failure. His reception was different from his first visit. Rather than standing as a supplicant before the thrones of judgment, he was seated among the blessed in Elysium after Maenads killed him during a Dionysian uprising. The spirits of the murdered muses tore him apart, scattering pieces that would eventually reunite in the shadowed realm. Reuniting with Eurydice proved difficult because she had moved beyond direct reach and had changed over time and experience in ways that even Orpheus's music could not fully reconcile. However, his tragic fate and divine heritage earned him special consideration, and his musical gifts continued to enrich the afterlife. These side tales added depth to the established order and enhanced the texture of the underworld by illustrating how individual tragedies unfolded against the backdrop of cosmic law. Alcestis demonstrated that love might momentarily triumph over death's claim. Ajax illustrating that disobedience could endure past death as the underworld developed, and its primary inhabitants' roles changed beyond their original definitions. The complexity of the realm required specialization, with deities creating specialized roles that addressed the increasingly complex relationship between the living and the dead. Minthy demonstrated the power of transformation at the boundary of realms, and Orpheus completed his journey from mortal artist to eternal resident. While continuing to pursue the unpunished guilty, the Araners evolved from mere avengers into agents of slow purification and created strategies for eventual reconciliation. The caverns where they tortured wrongdoers were converted into schools where people learned to fully understand the consequences of their acts. This instructional component implied that even the worst penalties had ultimate goals rather than being merely acts of retaliation. They added increasing intensity to their methods. Those who truly repented were given lower sentences than those who were wholly unrepentant, and they started collaborating with the courts to develop sentencing plans appropriate to certain crimes. The worst punishment was still meted out for family murder, but even these souls now had theoretical routes to ultimate calm thanks to the Ferryman. As experience gained from transporting innumerable souls, Karen's responsibilities grew beyond simple transportation. He became able to read spiritual conditions and determine which arrivals carried proper burial rites versus those who would wait a century on the shore. His boat also acquired semi-sentient qualities in response to moral weight, traveling smoothly for the righteous while becoming dangerously unstable for the murderous. He started acting as a preliminary counselor during the crossing, occasionally breaking his taciturn nature to offer wisdom distilled from witnessing millions of mortal endings. Some souls came believing that death was the end. They learned from Karen's experience to see it as a period of transition, and his role grew to include psychological preparation for the impending judgment. Sibaruz also developed into more than just a guard. His 3 heads each had unique personalities and functions, one identifying allowed passageways, one spotting illegal entry, and one sensing souls attempting to flee their designated domains. Because of his specialization, he became more of a sophisticated filter that ensured the proper passage of spirits in accordance with divine law rather than just a simple barrier. Variations in the Big Hound's bark evolved to fit his role. His presence alone became a teacher, teaching arrivals that death's realm functioned through established protocols rather than arbitrary power. Souls arriving with proper escort heard only a low rumble, acknowledging their right to pass living heroes attempting unauthorized entry, received the full force of his terrifying howl. Persephonine's function expanded beyond seasonal changes to include advocating for particular souls. She designed solutions that may alleviate specific sufferings without upsetting the larger order of justice because of her experience of painful separation from the world above, which gave her a special sympathy for individuals whose deaths occurred unexpectedly or unfairly. The king himself changed from a terrifyingly final figure to a more complex judge, administrator, and defender of cosmic balance. Her court sessions became occasions for special pleading. Mothers who died during childbirth might receive her special attention, and those who gave their lives for others found in her a powerful supporter during judgment. Her influence never overruled the realm's fundamental justice, but instead added a dimension of mercy to what might otherwise be a rigid application of cosmic law. He became the guarantee that endings came at their appointed times, neither too early nor too late. His court evolved beyond simple pronouncements into careful investigation of complex cases, and souls were now given full hearings where they could present their life circumstances. His authority grew to include not only ruling over the dead, but also making sure that death itself served its proper function in the larger universe. The divine inhabitants of the underworld developed into roles that balanced justice with understanding punishment, with the possibility of redemption and finality, with recognition of existence's complexity, as his judgments began to incorporate the realization that mortal existence rarely offered clear moral choices, and that lives were woven from countless threads of intention, circumstance, and consequence. The world of death had advanced to a level commensurate with the mortal comprehension that aimed to grasp it, establishing a religious framework in which death revealed the fundamental meaning of existence and ending acted as beginning. Sacred knowledge and mysteries traditions. The underworld has become more intricate than just a place for the dead to go. Turned into a wellspring of holy knowledge that has the power to change mortal existence itself. Numerous mystery traditions have developed, and each offering sparks a unique understanding. Considering the nature of death and, as a result, a changed outlook on life itself, these hidden rites built links between common religion and philosophical investigation, between myth and Eleusis, a little city northwest of Athens, offers a supernatural experience. Rituals that promised transforming insight into these secrets were derived from the old myth of Persephone's descent. Revered for almost 2 millennia and attracted followers from all around the Greek world. Both commoners and rulers wanted entrance into secrets that did not provide. Simply hoping for a better afterlife, but having a new perspective on the meaning of life. Early spring's smaller surprises at a grave served as preparatory. Purification began with the sacrifice of newborn pigs as stand-in offerings, purification in river waters, and discovered the fundamental legendary stories that served as the backdrop for the more significant discoveries that followed. These preemptive rites guaranteed that participants were prepared and reverent in their approach to the larger mysteries. The route Data allegedly took in her quest for her was followed on the way to Eleusis for the autumn festival. Pilgrims with lost daughters traveled the holy route, pausing at specific locations where they carried out particular rites, and the parade itself turned into a poignant participants' physical retracing of the heavenly journey through meditation on separation and reunion. Footprints into the Telesterians' magnificent hall of the sacred route. The greatest mysteries were revealed during initiation, but individuals took binding oaths of secrecy. Some components can be pieced together, and one of the main illusions in the encounter was the performance of Persephone's tale. Through religious drama, initiates saw depictions of dissension and division, reconnection and exploration that have symbolic significance beyond their actual. The story's pivotal discovery concerned what were referred to as the items. In Demina, this graphic element most likely consisted of sacred things, maybe reproductions of the items, displayed with spectacular lighting. underworld encounters with Persephone or journey-related symbols. The event went beyond simple observation between life and death, producing a feeling of involvement in heavenly mysteries that changed participants' perspectives on the effects of initiation. Claimed to have given individuals who encountered death a deep sense of calm. With altered consciousness, the Eleusinian visions appeared, comprehending death not as finality but as change. Like a seed turning into a harvest, people come to understand death through the agricultural cycles required breakdown prior to the winter's fresh growth. Gloom before the rebirth of spring, while Eleusinian secrets provided group change through yearly ceremonies. Orphic customs offered additional personal routes to enlightenment called for them. Renowned musician whose quest to recover Eurydice symbolized the soul's potential for transcendence. These lessons placed a strong emphasis on individual work to achieve spiritual. The twofold nature of mankind, which mortals contained, was at the heart of Orphic theology. Zeus eliminated both of the titanic elements that were left over from the primordial creatures and divine elements from the god that those same titans dismembered are Dionysian sparks. This cosmic catastrophe clarified human nature's tendency toward baseness as well as. In the Orphic worldview, divinity created spiritual tension that propelled the soul's journey through several lifetimes. Emphasis on cyclical development in an extended version of ancient Greek cosmology. Knowledge was accumulated by souls that came down from divine regions into mortal bodies, underwent cleansing in between lifetimes through numerous incarnations in the underworld, and progressively improved themselves until they finally reunited with the heavenly source. Instead of accepting fate passively, the process required active engagement. In Orphic societies, initiatory procedures included food restrictions, especially avoiding meat, and these restrictions were a reflection of views regarding the vegetative roots and the necessity of continuing to purify in order to advance spiritually. Additionally, practitioners stayed away from specific kinds of burial, thinking that customary rites could ensnare the spirit in material cycles. Rather than aiding in spiritual growth, Orphic poetry and hymns acted as. These sacred books are instruments for soul labor, their rhythms and philosophies intended to transform awareness. Contained thorough maps of the afterlife journey with passwords and tokens unique to it, for overcoming obstacles in the underworld and guidance on attaining freedom. From the rebirth cycle, the gold tablets interred with specific Orphic initiates included detailed instructions on how to address the guardians, which waterways to stay away from, and how to assert divine ancestry in the face of opposition, in contrast to the communal encounter with Eleusis. Orphic rituals frequently entailed lonely devotion, and the focused training of personal escrays prepared the soul for its ultimate. Memorizing divine formulas, meditating on certain myths, and practitioners became philosophers of death who lived alongside one another via the cultivation of detachment from material existence. Pythagoras and his adherents synthesized foot already in eternity, combining mathematical mysticism with Orphic insights to create a complex paradigm for comprehending the soul's passage through cosmic order, in which Orphism placed a strong emphasis on mystical experience. By considering the cosmos as a musical harmony, Pythagoreanism introduced logical structure, controlled by mathematical concepts that souls might understand them. The Pythagorean universe functioned on numerical correlations that reached into the souls in the afterlife, moved through spheres of existence that were numbered by sacred proportions. The world of the afterlife itself included geometrical pathways and architecture that adhered to decisions made using mathematical justice purifications in accordance with perfect ratios. Knowing these concepts about harmonic intervals made it possible to create more effective spiritual development, soul transmigration turned into. Essential to Pythagorean theory, which holds that reincarnation follows exact patterns. From one incarnation to the next, the soul continued its ethical calculations based on karmic mathematics, gaining or losing spiritual weight based on deeds, moral gravity, and underworld purification. Similar to spiritual mathematics that determines the best cures for every soul's instabilities, among their customs was communal living in an effort to achieve harmony. As instruments for the soul, existence members studied astronomy, mathematics, and music. Purification, believing that knowledge of cosmic equilibrium equipped them for the more. Pythagoras' well-known theorem on harmony, experienced after death, expressed a philosophical concept as well as mathematical truth. Deeper truths about the soul, the universe, and divinity were revealed by the interactions between the triangle parts. Specialized websites where global borders dissolved were created because of the desire to speak with the deceased. Sufficient for regulated interaction with the necromantic oracle of the dead merged practical knowledge of channeling with religious authority. These websites allegedly used particular regional characteristics to enhance communication. The Oracle of the Dead at Erin, which is situated in a Prus with the Dark Realm, exploited the spot where 3 rivers converged, causing the Piplethan fire to flare up. And coitus lamentation travelers endured several days of preparations that included seclusion and fasting, and ceremonial washing before entering a system of caves that mimic. The tour of subterranean geography ended in a shadowy room where they hoped to meet departed family members or gain insight from historical figures in architecture. Design that improves the psychological impact of visitors who are confused by small passageways. Different floor levels produced a feeling of sinking, while whispering were accentuated by the acoustics. Sacred waters reflected firelight in ways that spoke to otherworldly voices. The entire structure served as a theatrical device to evoke a sense of otherworldly presence. Conditions under which rituals of connection with the dead become psychologically believable. According to strict guidelines, inquirers brought offerings tailored to their intended respondent: honey for the blood of murdered infants, wine for suicides, and warriors performed precise invocations based on inquiries from oracle priests. Had to adhere to the correct formula in order to prevent upsetting the priest's spirits. Themselves acted as translators who had received training in differentiating between random occurrences and important conversations. These behaviors, which took place at the intersection of worlds, reflected evolving perception of the underworld as permeable when properly approached, in contrast to previous customs. Believed that, aside from heroic intrusion into mysterious traditions, Death's realm was locked off. Indicated that suitable rituals could provide brief opportunities for mutually beneficial interactions between the living and the dead. This accessibility enabled the actual use of underworld wisdom for mortal worries when these many mystery cultures developed relationships and synthesis developed. Practitioners of various systems frequently took part in several. Greek religious practices adaptability through initiations that result in individual synthesis of esoteric knowledge. Permitted the imaginative fusion of Orphic theology with Eleusinian feeling. Integrating Pythagorean theory and practice into personal spiritual journeys. Traditions and accumulated wisdom have changed how people view death. Was the afterlife just a place where the fate of the gods chose to send people? With the right planning, education, and rituals, spirits could actively engage in their personal odyssey, the underworld evolved into a domain of potential rather than just condemnation, a location where further development was still possible. Perhaps this democratization of supernatural knowledge signified a significant change. What had previously been heroic prerogative direct in Greek religious consciousness. Through initiation, the mysteries of death became accessible. The secrets of the underworld passed down through the ages by philosophers and mystics, provided mortals with the opportunity to transcend their typical limitations without needing heavenly ancestry or remarkable bravery, yet even as they organized, the secrets remained mysterious. Approaches to death's wisdom, they maintained that the most profound realities could not be adequately conveyed in straightforward words. Experience through ceremonial meditation and meticulous planning remained crucial. The underworld persisted in imparting information through transformation rather than merely transmission. Mystery traditions of those who ventured to discover its secrets proved that the kingdom of death contained not only residence and judgment, but also education and progress, the king of shadows ruled over an area that fulfilled a cosmic purpose through individual transformation by providing avenues for wisdom while adhering to these customs. Made certain that, as mystery traditions, when death arrived, souls would be ready for its opportunities and trials. Evolution in philosophy provided experiential wisdom. Philosophers started to consider, evaluate, and retell the classic underworld stories that were originally. Over time, organized theology evolved from mythological storytelling, and these philosophers' ethical frameworks prompted them to pose the question, what if the afterlife reflected not just divine whim, but the application of intellectual ideas to cosmic justice, the first literary? Homer's epics contain depictions of the world of death, where there are shadows in reduced form separated from the vigor that characterized their mortal existence. Achilles' well-known lament to Odysseus encapsulated this desolation, as he would. Instead of ruling over all the dead, I would rather work as a farmhand among the living. Vision highlighted the soul's detachment from light feeling and significance. Instead of using punishment, the Homeric underworld used depletion. Or honor every soul, irrespective of their position on earth or the things they have done. The same asphodel fields, with burial privileges being the main difference. Those who were denied an appropriate ceremony continued to live in discomfort between worlds instead of accepting death as the final equalizer in the gloomy residence reduced heroes and, according to this philosophical system, rulers to insubstantial echoes. Significance only existed in the mortal world. The afterlife only functioned as. Heroes were not looking for a platform for what might be, but rather for what had been. Clow's enduring popularity, which they attained by actions that outlived their physical appearances. However, even this splendor was mostly recalled by the living, providing little. Below Homer's influence, consolation to fatting spirits remained exactly. Due to its frankness, which instead of providing consoling delusions about the ostentatious benefits his vision faced. The harsh reality of mortality, consciousness devoid of agency, memory devoid of substance. Identity diminished to muttered names, this encounter with meaninglessness fueled. Plato transformed underworld religion via both religious innovation and philosophical investigation. By giving it moral significance and philosophical weight, his myth of. In the Republic, the afterlife was recast as a cosmic court where divine justice was administered with mathematical accuracy, but souls didn't just arrive at predestined locations, and they wisely selected their subsequent incarnations. Acquired from past incarnations, the philosopher's perspective grew. Souls navigated the old landscape, with mechanical sophistication. Spindle of necessity, where cosmic motion was determined by the harmonies that fate sang. They saw judges render decisions based not only on their immediate moral merit, but also on them. Emphasis was placed on the soul's potential for future growth through experience. Plato's innovations included teaching by consequence rather than merely retaliation. The idea that purifying occurs in between death and rebirth. Souls underwent refinement and cleaning in proportion to their moral weight. Procedure that used both joy and suffering to make sure that every soul fully realized the consequences of its decisions the underworld became into. Spiritual change in an alchemical laboratory prior to returning to. His paradigm proposed an afterlife architecture that responded to embodied existence. Instead of designated areas, the space arranged itself based on ethical need. The deepest and most fundamental needs for soul development. Purification, whereas those that were almost flawless merely required slight modification. Prior to reaching a state of heavenly contemplation, this adaptability may. At the same time, the philosopher conceived cosmic justice as both universal and personal. The goal of funeral traditions and grieving, instead of guaranteeing appropriate placement in predetermined eternal domains. Souls should be prepared for continued travels toward truth death-marked by these actions. Shift between learning stages instead of the final exam, this viewpoint changed. Religious practice from apprehensive gratification to prudent planning for. Stoic thinkers who believed in eternal life saw death from a natural philosophical perspective. Seeing the fate of the soul as a manifestation of the divine, reason known as logos, that pervades everything. Its underworld interpretations, which placed more emphasis on acceptance and reason than on mystery. Reward death symbolized the individual's breakdown and return to the source. Identity into the cosmic awareness from which it had momentarily surfaced, as described by Marcus Aurelius. Death is merely a change of circumstances. You entered this world as a participant and will leave as part of the acceptance of change, just as you would with seasonal changes in nature. This viewpoint dispelled conventional anxieties regarding underworld travel. According to posthumous judgments, death was a natural occurrence that required. The Stoic afterlife collapsed because there was no distinct geography or heavenly governance. Into an unavoidable return to basic principles, similar to how bodies break down. Souls reintegrated with the global mind into earth, water, air, and fire. During this shift, separate awareness may endure for a short time before merging with the eternal. Pattern that it originated from, this procedure had no rewards or penalties. Simply the conclusion of natural cycles from which their moral code was founded. Duty-driven motivation as opposed to hope or dread of dying, according to. Whether individual or collective, virtue brought one into alignment with the current cosmic order. Being cognizant after death lost significance in comparison to carrying out one's function in the logical cosmos. If there was an underworld at all, it followed the same logical rules. This ideology, which governed everything, provided freedom from superstition while death couldn't frighten those who comprehended their basic moral principles while upholding ethical seriousness. The underworld's ability to frighten or seduce was diminished by its unity with all of existence, becoming into just another manifestation of the unstoppable forces of nature, sages. Prepared for death via logical means rather than ritual or belief. On the other hand, reflection that showed how mortality fits into everlasting reason. To abstract philosophy, mystery religions continued too. Profound transformation beyond theoretical comprehension was provided by first-hand encounters with heavenly truth. mythical structures were maintained and developed by traditions while asserting that the Dionysian mysteries concentrated on initiation rather than analysis in order to achieve the greatest wisdom. On ego death as a rite of ecstasy, including wine to prepare for genuine mortality. Participants experienced brief periods of music and symbolic amputation. Loss of personal identity, this death practice taught that awareness might endure losing their regular selves, preparing them for the final. Backwriting especially addressed the issue of transition with less resistance and dread. By reenacting Orpheus's voyage, the underworld begins figuratively. Descended were reborn after dying through ceremonial processes that caused them. The event is said to draw a line between human transformation and mythological tale. Participants' dread of dying was fundamentally replaced by curiosity. Concerning enduring existence outside of the body, the secrets of Isis modified. Greek necessities and Egyptian wisdom portray death as a path to reunification with the god. Guides the goddess Isis in her quest to find her mutilated lover Osiris. As each soul sought wholeness, initiates discovered that apparent devastation was essential. Death becomes a portal rather than an end in the cosmic regeneration cycle. These traditions argued that philosophical speculation couldn't be a destination, but rather a transit. Substitute first-hand knowledge while scholars discussed the layout of the underworld. Despite theological precepts, mystics asserted first-hand experience with deaths. Through changed awareness and religious performance, they provided mysteries rather than arguments. But change not beliefs, but knowledge gained via meticulous planning and brave interaction with liminal states, the interaction between ideologies. Greek civilization was characterized by dynamic tension, brought about by analysis and religious experience. Temples with mystic rites stood close to places where reasoned conversation was held. Questioned conventional wisdom, initiates may also pursue philosophy while. Through religious practice, thinkers frequently looked for mystical confirmation of their beliefs. Plutarch, a priest at Delphi, was one of the individuals created by this mixture. In his attempts to write philosophical treatises on divine nature, to bring intellectual understanding and mythological tradition together, implying that there were logical truths in old tales that could be understood by both reason and. With disclosure, the underworld functioned within this framework in accordance with moral rule that can be understood with rigorous study, but that can only be truly understood through sacred. Philosophers maintained that claims to certainty were the main source of experience conflicts. The nature of death and its repercussions could be ascertained by reason alone, according to religious authority. Believed that revelation was necessary because divine secrets were beyond human comprehension. Contradictory aspects were frequently tolerated in popular religion, which practiced both mystery and philosophical ethics. Initiations without considering it necessary to settle theoretical conflicts. This. Numerous methods enhanced Greek society's understanding of death. Death's domain was open to several interpretations, both mystical and rational. Traditional and inventive, enabling people to choose pathways that suit their temperaments. And conditions the underworld turned into a lab where people struggled with. Its ultimate inquiries yield a variety of wisdom rather than a single response. Resulting from ongoing research, the philosophical development thus changed Hades from a mythological location to a center for humankind's innermost reflections, whether via Platonic mathematics or her own tears. Magical metamorphosis or Stoic acceptance, each strategy represented. The domain of death was first created to help humanity deal with its own mortality. The conclusion of House Mortal has changed to become a mirror reflecting all cultures. Greatest aspirations and darkest anxieties over life itself as Roman civilization. Adaptation and transformation in Roman. Extended, assimilating, and organizing Greek religious ideas while modifying. The underworld, which is today known by a variety of names, to uniquely Roman ideals and sensibilities. Included Orcus and ultimately connected to wealth by the name Pluto, experienced substantial. Greek mystical ideas were reinterpreted by Roman pragmatism as the Romans approached more ordered, law-oriented afterlife views. Spiritual association with traits of pragmatism instead than merely embracing. Before embracing the Greek names, they found practical equivalency within their own religious system. Broader mythical structure, this procedure produced layers of meaning that enhanced rather than substituted for the basic ideas. At first, underground treasure was administered by Despota, the Roman father of riches. His early experience with soil fertility naturally linked him to both agriculture and minerals. To mortality by means of the Greek cycle of planting, death, and regeneration. Impact grew stronger as Dee took in the Dark Lord's intricate mythology. While retaining his association with worldly prosperity, Pluto's title became especially Roman invention that placed a strong emphasis on wealth coming from the domain beneath this dual. Identity as the giver of prosperity and the Lord of Death was a great fit with Roman ideals. That linked monetary prosperity to divine favor occasionally functioned as shrines to Pluto. Banks where valuables could be securely kept under heavenly guard, establishing literal relationship between Cerberus, a subterranean deity, and wealth. Kept his fundamental shape and purpose, but he picked up Latin names that highlighted. In various ways, the Romans referred to him as triceps three-headed and connected him with. Using the iron collar that savage dogs wear, they created particular guidelines for pacifying him with special honey pastries known as soups, which turned into. The fairer men continued to perform conventional rituals in ways that Greek traditions had not codified. Despite the fact the Romans portrayed him with the same name, his perpetual mission. His archaic aspect was further highlighted by their art's distinctively Latin elements. More forcefully than Greek depictions that emphasize the estrangement of death through ghoulish faces. The criteria for the obol coin were formalized from beauty and youth into certain denominations suitable for Roman coins, such as the Aenard crystallized Rome. Knowledge about the underworld that would impact Western perceptions for Virgil's methodical depiction of the world of death across millennia combined. Roman organizational concepts combined with Greek geographical elements to create the most comprehensive and significant afterlife map found in classical literature, his. For Roman pilgrims, the entrance to Lake Avarus in Campia became the sulfuric emissions and gloomy atmosphere of the volcanic landscape offered. The location is supported by compelling physical evidence of supernatural entry points. Provided the Romans with a domestic gateway while being in line with Etruscan holy geography, to celestial secrets that were traditionally connected to remote Greek locations. One of Virgil's structural inventions was the underworld entrance, where a variety of personified miseries awaited. Welcome to this gathering of people who are grieving, ill, elderly, afraid of starvation and dying. Abstract ideas that are presented as early warning signs regarding mortalities. This Roman edition of Companions focused on the psychological aspects of deaths. Way before spirits arrived to conventional mythical elements, with Annas being guided by the Sibyl of Cumae. Symbolized the Roman blending of the prophetic heritage across these areas with Her position as an underworld navigator blended Etruscan and Greek oracular lore. Death expertise, producing a person who was aware of the location and function of mortality's domains through. As the trip progressed, each location provided instruction on appropriate. Virgil's depiction of judgment in living and dying became more complex than usual. Reports, although Minos continued to decide Sol's destiny, his court now functioned with. Testimony and circumstances were heard, and Roman legal precision proof was provided. Regarded as all representing the legal systems that the Romans treasured in their terrestrial. The underworld's courts proved that heavenly justice functioned similarly to Roman law. Roman burial rites were decided upon after thorough consideration rather than by decree. Changed from straightforward agricultural customs to complex rites that support social rank and paying respect to the deceased, these customs blended ancestral adoration of underworld mythology, fostering intricate connections between. The path to a dignified funeral for surviving family members and departed family members started. Romans sealed the soul immediately after death by closing the mouth and eyes. Before the last rites could be executed, they referred to the name of the died 3 times, a procedure used to check for early death while coins put in the mouth served twofold in the commencement of the division between realms. Obligation as Kuren's fare and as protection against waking up and discovering oneself. Roman remains were inadvertently buried alive during funeral processions. Principles that the rich employed, such as family dignity and public exhibition. Professional mourning musicians and even performers dressed as their ancestors' deaths. These images showed up in burial cortes for those who had served in public office, establishing a clear link between present death and family accomplishments through such processions. Showed how the development of tomb design benefited from individual mortality in the service of community continuity. From basic burial markers to ornate monuments that were on par with religious structures in scale, these constructions acted as long-term links, linking locations around the planet. Inscriptions frequently addressed the possibility of preserving links between surviving descendants and deceased family members, by making sure that strangers would remember the deceased immediately, and possibly provide drinks that kept spirits alive in the afterlife. For 9 years, the Parentalia celebration was a prime example of Roman creativity in ancestor worship. Families visited tombs on certain days in February to present bread, wine, salt, and flowers as they ate ceremonial meals with their deceased, institutionalizing. Greek underworld ideas were converted into municipal religion during the mourning period that brought families together by a common memory and obligation to the Greek deities were methodically reframed by extinct Roman society to conform to. Phane became Proserpa, highlighting her role as a person with their own set of values. Despite occasionally reducing her queenly power, this change mirrored Roman discomfort with strong female leaders claiming authority over basic. Roman conceptions of the Proserpa's voyage placed less emphasis on cosmic processes than on cosmic necessity, and more on family responsibilities that were disturbed and fixed their versions highlighted. The tale is made more poignant by the series' portrayal of grief as a mother rather than a goddess. Embedded in Roman family values and personally relevant, the story's emphasis on agricultural elements over mystical transformation brought it into line with practical Roman worries about the success of the harvest led Mercury to increase Hermes' role. The Romans were a psychopath with distinctively Roman organizing abilities. showed him holding accounting tablets, implying that the world of death functioned with spirits that were meticulous and bureaucratic, were appropriately registered and assigned in accordance with administrative guidelines, not just led to their destination. The Furies went through procedures that would impress Roman civil servants. Notable change in Roman hands compared to how Greeks frequently depicted them. Romans highlighted their function in upholding the primordial energies of vengeance. Social order, they turned into the duri witnesses who informed the divine about crimes. This shift reflected Roman law, with authority functioning more like celestial prosecutors than independent avengers. Hecate kept her because of her preference for the judicial system above capricious punishment. Despite being at a crossroads, the Romans acquired distinctively Roman characteristics. Constructed ornate shrines known as Hecatea, where three paths converged. Her position grew to include specific offerings and timing constraints. Involved protecting the home, which would lessen her sole emphasis on the underworld. Changes and more integration into Roman religious life on a daily basis. Emperors from underworld mythology were naturally associated with imperial cults. Especially after deification, required channels between earthly power and the underworld's divine status provided a useful metaphorical framework for talking about divine rulers who underwent imperial transitions while preserving their religious sensibility. Pluto Dista's wealth ties highlighted their authority. Earthly resources and their possible afterlife trips to the underworld acquired importance as illustrations of how people might surpass death through remarkable accomplishment. Royal funerals consequently became into official events showcasing appropriate cosmic shift from earthly king to heavenly guardian. Of imperial apotheosis necessitated a high level of Greek. Roman political theology combined with underworld ideas and the souls of exceptional rulers. Didn't just enter Elysium. Instead, they bypassed the usual posthumous processes and rose straight to divine rank. This promotion established a standard that powerful Romans could aspire to. Roman poets used the underworld to link good behavior in this life with amazing riches in the next. Images to honor or disparage modern-day political heroes, demonstrating civic virtue as they worked toward suns joining Tartarus Eternal. Penalties, the adaptability of mythic interpretation permitted. By using conventional story structures to address current topics, authors might make underworld stories more relatable too. Greek underworld notions were altered by Roman adaptation due to imperial considerations into a methodical theological framework that upheld state ideology while the realm of death became fully Romanized in terms of personal meaning. More structured, closer to material prosperity, and more assimilated with family and societal responsibility. Yet beyond these pragmatic adjustments are the underlying enigmas. Continued to provide consolation and reflection to the Romans as they confronted death in their growing dominion, the shadow world that started as evolution and cultural legacy. The primeval abyss had become one of the most enduring symbols in human history. Systems from disorder to cosmic order into the Greek philosophical framework. The Romans' underground expedition would reverberate for ages. Latter cultures transition from prehistoric belief to eternal. Metaphor illustrates how myth can change while retaining its fundamental strength. As Christianity expanded throughout the Mediterranean region, it came into contact with developed underworld ideas that demonstrated resourcefulness and difficulty. Church founders did not completely denounce or disregard these customs, but reinterpreted some aspects in a new way while incorporating others that were consistent with biblical revelation. religious conceptions that the topography of Tartarus resonated with in particular. Ideas of hell, the never-ending agony that is so closely associated with particular sins, served as models for Christians' conceptions of divine retribution, with the image of the Tantalus reaching fruit. Sisyphus's never-ending work for people clinging to salvation without genuine repentance demonstrated the pointlessness of efforts without faith, the exactness of. Translation into Christian morality was made easier by Greek afterlife justice. The genesis of purgatory in theology was largely influenced by the Greek idea. In interlife purification, the idea that spirits could be purified by graduated suffering instead of being sent straight to final destinations that matched the wisdom of. This modification permitted mercy within the intermediate phases seen in previous riddles. Justice that satisfies both pastoral compassion for humankind and philosophical rigor. Despite its shortcomings, the Christian landscape of the dead also maintained areas that were beneficial. The blessed pastures of Elysium were echoed in classical ideas of paradise, but the final judgment journey retained structural parallels to Greek models. Even the troublesome character of Christ's suffering in hell and his journey to freedom. Heroic underworld expeditions that attempted to save the righteous souls imprisoned, since ancient times were similar to unfairly imprisoned St. Augustine, especially those involved in classical ideas about the afterlife that put a lot of work on showing how pagan wisdom aimed in the direction of, yet ultimately fell short of Christian revelation instead. Rather than rejecting Platonic ideas of soul cleansing as merely incorrect, he aimed to demonstrate how early thinkers saw glimmers of truth that completion of gospel instruction with a completely synthesized medieval imagination. In Christian components, producing incredibly complex afterlife visions in Dante's Divine Comedy, symbolizes the end of this procedure, in which Virgil himself acts as a roadmap across areas that blend Christian theology and Greek topography with Roman structure. The underworld of medieval metaphysics preserved its classical elements, including rivers of particular guards at thresholds for the aim of progressive punishments that reflect earthly crimes, but these components took on new meaning in a cosmic drama. Centered solely on the history of salvation, the ancient rulers of the dead gave way. Power to render Christian decisions, whereas traditional heroes served as models for what earthly intelligence could not do without heavenly favor, good pagan people are achieving. Underworld themes were interwoven into searches for divine objects in Arthurian stories. Opposes the trip to NWN, the Greek Hades-merged Celtic otherworld. Become a model for spiritual tribulations in which knights encountered their own spiritual circumstances. These modifications maintained the crucial pattern of transformation, return, and descent testing while refocusing attention on Christian chivalrous values, especially in the visual arts. Illustrated manuscripts from the Middle Ages that illustrated this fusion showed the hells landscape with a focus on architectural details that went beyond the traditional accuracy of Bosch and his. Underworld scenarios shown by contemporaries blended Christian-specific suffering with legendary creatures, producing pictures that both informed and frightened viewers about the risks of death. Underworld dramas were directly introduced to medieval times by the mystery play tradition. What theological treatises explained become tangible through these performances. Abstractly, the path of the soul from judgment to punishment or purification to ultimate assignment. Viewers observed well-known biblical characters interacting with classical figures in areas built from both customs. The Renaissance rekindled interest in both Christian and classical sources. faith allowing underworld imagery to take center stage in it. Humanist scholars have uncovered the original mythological setting. Greek writings that were partially retained by medieval tradition, enabling more complex. Admiration for ancient religious psychology, which Michelangelo and other painters integrated. Greek underworld characters with advanced theological concepts in Christian situations. Reason for Charon effing souls across the Aaron in his final judgment. Illustrating how, when used appropriately, classical symbols could enlighten rather than contradict biblical revelation. Realize that this integration demonstrated mature cultural confidence instead of nervousness. Literary works of syncretism went beyond religious education to examine psychological. Shakespeare's ghosts living in the liminal zones between retaliation. Marlowe's Faustus and the remainder were taken from both classical and medieval traditions. Created dramatic tension by negotiating with traditional demons in Christian hell. Through conflicting conceptions of divine justice, the era's investigation of. The concept of consciousness itself heavily used underworld analogies, such as the soul's dark night. Imagery used in the journey towards self-knowledge and the decline into lunacy. Renaissance psychology, which was developed over millennia of mythical growth, so carried on the ancient. Customs while focusing them on internal, rather than just external domains. Greek mythology was further preserved and developed through the resurgence of occult practices. Alchemical literature describing spiritual transformation used underworld themes. The domain of dissolution, putrefaction, and the language of death. John D. Rebirth and other academic magicians attempted to replicate old practices of necromancy while asserting that such communications have a Christian basis. Underworld symbolism was once again modified by the Romantic movement, finding ideal metaphors for the recently explored areas of the unconscious mind in the realm of death. The essential drama of Orpheus's failed quest was discovered by poets and artists. The endeavor to transform inspiration from darkness into light through artistic creativity, always in danger of losing what was desired due to an early revelation. Jurors quickly incorporated aspects of the classical underworld into a psychological framework that anticipated depth. Psychology, the experience of one's shadow, the fall into temptation. Using mythical frameworks to negotiate with one's darker sides, while investigating new ideas about the intricacy of personality. Underworld imagery was frequently used in Gothic literature to create a gloomy atmosphere, such as destroyed temples to Hecate. Catacombs resonating with cries and enigmatic pawns reflecting. These components, the faces of the deceased, created emotional landscapes where logical. When borders vanished, the term underworld arose to refer to areas where Blake's visionary writings were too dangerous for regular consciousness to venture. Specifically reinterpreted classical mythology in his underworld and unique cosmology. Instead than being exterior, figures functioned as psychological forces inside each person. This internalization was the conclusion of deities ruling distinct domains. As a procedure that started in antiquity, the understanding that the realm of death held. The cage and other romantic conceptions are mirrors of mortal consciousness itself, suggested that the earliest attempts by humans to map inward experience, the underworld, were portrayed by mythology. They particularly captivated me as a representation of the darkness that precedes enlightenment, the foundation upon which individual consciousness and civilization were built. While asserting a deeper truth from mythical insight, interpretations purposefully shifted away from literal belief. Underworld traditions are still being mined for metaphors in modern culture. narrative frameworks in psychological understanding, especially in Jungian psychology, accepted traditional images of the afterlife as depictions of archetypal patterns. The hero's trip through the world of death eventually established a pattern for it. Talking about individuation, the process by which the soul becomes entire by facing its. The depths of popular media, from television shows to video games, frequently use frameworks derived from Greek afterlife ideas in the role-playing game. Players particularly enjoy this genre since it lets them act out heroic descents. Encounter underworld guards and come out changed. These virtual adventures fulfill. Rituals were historically used to treat psychological demands in ancient mystery systems. Initiation literature keeps examining ideas from the underworld with comprehensive understanding of their potential for symbolism, Milan Kundera's memory. As the cherished spirits of Lay Toni Morrison in Journeys, Beneath by Haruki Murakami. Tokyo all show how, when applied to current identity issues, historical patterns retain their force. The visual arts of trauma and transformation use traditional underworld imagery with intentional comprehension of its accumulated meanings. Modern installations could blend Sibaru's with surveillance technology, indicating the operation of traditional guardianship concepts. In contemporary settings, these pieces presume that viewers are familiar with mythological illusion, while challenging its ongoing significance in music across genres. Allusions to the idea of classical underworld trips that progressive rock bands create. Hip-hop artists' records about Orpheus' descent use Tartarus. These adaptations use imagery to address structural injustice, implying that death's underworld keeps providing literary and symbolic materials for creative expression. The Greek underworld. Change from a legendary location to a cultural icon illustrates how basic inquiries concerning mortality are processed by the human imagination, which started as an explanation for what occurs after death has developed into a useful tool for comprehending consciousness, ethics, transcendence, and creativity throughout life, as well as its enduring religious, psychological, supernatural, and pagan to Christian cultural shifts. Symbolic attests to its relevance on several levels of meaning in the world created by ancient imagination tackled issues so fundamental to human existence that later modern secular society claims that cultures find it more beneficial to adapt than to give up. Unexpected link to these age-old traditions when psychologists talk about examining one's darkest tendencies when artists explain how seekers can sync to creative sources when they spiritual transformational journeys that unintentionally mirror the structure. The underworld trek that guided heroes through Hades' kingdom is still in place. Workable model since it tackles psychological issues that go beyond historical eras, as its legacy implies. That rather than being an antiquated religious system, the Greek underworld is a permanent roadmap for human awareness, its meticulous charting of internal areas of shame, memory, desire, and metamorphosis that keeps providing advice for those who are prepared to confront darkness as a necessary condition for wisdom. The world below has evolved into the interior depths, retaining its ability to illuminate despite professing to have moved beyond its original context over the decades. Consequently, the underworld is not just a historical curiosity, but also a living existence in humanity's endeavor to understand the inexplicable since its inception in the crystallization of primordial darkness into structured mythology and its subsequent abstraction into. It is a universal symbol that charts the development of human awareness. Never-ending pursuit to illuminate darkness, give meaning to enigma, and gain comprehension of The Dark Sovereign is the final shift that everyone must eventually go through. Who initially welcomed his dark dominion was unable to predict how his realm would eventually light up the human condition over thousands of years, yet this change might be the ultimate knowledge of the dying world that anything made with endings in mind would give rise to countless new beginnings that a room intended for finality would create limitless possibilities, and that humanity's most enduring light would emerge from the darkest places in this. The manner in which the Greek underworld moves from mythological geography to psychological truth, from long-held beliefs to timeless metaphors, the tale is similar to the Souls. It was designed to accept unending findings, but change the kingdom of shadows into the wisdom within the realm below. Shows us the way of death's domain and the light of knowledge. Thus, the lengthy story of the Greek underworld comes to an end, but like everything else, stories about the mystery of mortality, they don't really have a conclusion, just an invitation to keep going down into wisdom, rising via metamorphosis, and realizing that the path through death inevitably returns to life.